number two there. Number two there is required discernment with maturity. Required discernment with maturity. Let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We're reading from verse 6. But I speak this by permission and not of commandment. You know, every word of God is given by inspiration of God. And when Paul the apostle was going to say something not commanded by God, not instituted by God, not put in place by God, the Lord made him to say, tell them, this is not my commandment. Tell them, this is your commandment. Tell them, you're a man, you're a minister, you're not God. This is what God has said. Tell them, what you are saying on this other side is not what God has said, is what you are saying. It will be wonderful if preachers will do like that, and the things they say which are not in the word of God, if they will tell the people and say, that one untouchable, that's the word of God, that's the mind of God, and that is the institution of God. But this one now, this is what I think. Let us know, this is what you think. And let us know that this is not exactly what the Lord is saying. And so he said, this I speak by permission and not of commandment. Look at verse 7. In verse 7, for I would, he said, this is my preference, this is not God's precept. I would that all men were even as I am. This is my preference, this is not God's commandment, but every man has his proper gift of God. One after this manner, and another after that. Then in verse 8, it says, I say therefore to the unmarried and the widows, I say, this is not God, I say to the unmarried and the widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I. Look at verse 9. In verse 9, he now says, but if they cannot contain, don't say, I'm following Paul, and then you lose your soul. Don't say, I am going to live like Paul, and then you miss heaven. But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. That's the required discernment we need with maturity. That you are not following any preacher blindly. You are not following anyone. He calls himself apostle, he calls himself prophet, he calls himself national, international evangelist, he calls himself overall pastor, whatever. He calls himself a Bible teacher. Understand when he's talking the word. Understand when he's talking something private and personal. And have